Hi, this is Brian Burke from Toronto, Ontario, and welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Okay, well, welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Brian Burke. So thank you, sir, for hopping on.
My pleasure, Sean.
And your birthday nonetheless. So it should be happy birthday you, but it certainly feels like happy birthday me.
Well, that's when you get to a certain age, birthdays aren't as enjoyable as they were when you were younger. So let's move on, my friend.
Sounds good, sir. Well, I thought we'd start in the beginning. I know you're one of 10 kids. What was that like? I'm from a big, I thought was a big family, 5 kids in the Newman family, but 10, I'm sure had a lot of fun in there.
Well, I enjoyed it. There was always somebody to play with, or fight with, or read a book with, or play a board game with. And there were 6 girls and 4 boys. I had 2 older brothers who I idolized, and I enjoyed it. I thrived in that environment, but it made you a little tougher too, having 2 older brothers. So I loved it. I wouldn't trade my childhood experiences for anything.
I have 3 older brothers, and I finally got to play with a few of them in senior hockey. Did you ever get to play with your older brothers?
My oldest brother was a football star, and he went to Stanford, and he played freshman football there. But then he had a knee injury that ended his career. But he played freshman football at Stanford. Started on an undefeated high school football championship team, and then my next brother was a football player and a wrestler, and he wrestled at Dartmouth. And then, so they weren't hockey players. I'd skate with them on the pond once in a while, but not very much. But I played high school football and then hockey, and then went on to play college hockey at Providence.
So having older brothers that played football, how did you get into hockey then? I would assume that, having older brothers, admiring them as you say, I'm surprised you weren't playing football more.
Well, I did. I played up until my senior year in high school, and that's the one thing about playing high school football is when you walk off the field your last year, except for 1 or 2 guys on the team, you've played your last football game. You're never gonna. It's not like you and your buddies a couple years later say, "Hey, let's all put on full gear and go down and play football at high school." I remember walking off the field talking to 2 of my teammates saying, "I'll never put this stuff on again." But I did play high school football. It's funny. I was telling my kids last night. I loved high school football. I wish I'd have been better at football, but I was too small, and I love the planning and the preparation, the detail that went into it. So we'd play Friday nights under the lights. Saturday we'd go over the film of the team we were playing the following Friday night, and we'd study. They'd say, okay, they use a 5-man line. So I was left guard. So Burke, you got a defensive tackle. He wears number 74. He's really big, but he's slow. And he moves poorly to his left. Like the detail that went in all week, and then Friday night play, and then switched completely and start game planning for the next game. All the offensive plays we would run against that defense. Any special plays we'd use on special teams. I loved the detail and the planning and the meticulous nature of it.
That's probably why you were so good at what you did in the NHL then, with meticulous planning and details and everything else. Your career as a GM and everything else you've done, there's a lot of work that goes into that.
Well, one thing, young people ask me all the time what how they can get into sports, and I said, well, I'll tell you, the first rule is be the hardest worker. Like I remember when I was the president of hockey operations with the Calgary Flames a couple of years ago, and we didn't have assigned parking spaces. So my daughters, who were at the time probably 10 and 12, maybe 11 and 13, we pulled in on a Saturday. There's no one there. We pulled into the parking garage outside the Saddle Dome, and my daughters laughed. They were like, "You don't have a parking spot." Because like in Vancouver, I had this Brian Burke, general manager, 24 hours, and Toronto, same thing. And they said, "Dad, you don't have a parking spot." I said, "Yes, I do. I can park anywhere I want as long as I'm the first one here," which I typically was. So I had a parking spot. I could park anywhere I wanted. So yeah, hard work is a key to being successful, but that's true in any field.
Well, and time or going off hard work, I know like from listening to your story, you didn't start playing hockey until you were 13. Essentially, when you moved to Minnesota, I mean, the hockey state, you start playing hockey. And in what, 4 short years, all of a sudden you're at Providence playing Division I hockey. That in itself, you must have put in a ton of work, I assume.
Well, yes, I did. What happened was we moved to Minnesota when I was 12, and we got stuck. There was a blizzard, so the moving trucks got stuck like in Ohio or Pennsylvania somewhere. So we were stuck at a Howard Johnson's in Bloomington, Minnesota for 3 days. But the state high school hockey tournament was on, and they packed the old Met Center. In fact, where we were stuck in the hotel was only a few miles from the Met Center. I grew up only a few miles from the Met Center. And they get 18,000 people on Thursday night. Friday, like they had 2 sessions. The afternoon session, 17,000 people, whatever it was. They'd make them leave. Then they'd bring in a whole new crowd for the evening games, and so on Friday and Saturday. And I fell in love. I watched every game. I fell in love with it. And I thought, what a beautiful sport. I had been to a couple of Bruins games. We lived in Boston before that. I had skated a half dozen times on a pond, but I'd never played organized hockey. I couldn't skate. And I started that next year. So I played Bantam House, Midget B, Midget A, high school. So like my 5th year of organized hockey, I was playing Minnesota State high school hockey. My 6th year of organized hockey, I was playing at Providence College. So it was a pretty amazing ascent. And I had 4 rules that I followed that I would advise any young athlete to take into account. So my 4 rules were: 1 is be the hardest worker, practice and games. I don't respect guys who just work hard in games. Number 2 is be a coach's dream. Always be in position, always do the right thing, pay attention in film sessions. My coach never had to say, look, you're 10 feet out of position. I was never out of position because I listened. I got the highest grade in high school football. We had to take a test at the end of training camp on the playbook. I always get the highest grade of the lineman. Be a coach's dream. Number 3 is be an indispensable teammate. Like, be compassionate, be empathetic, be a leader when it's your turn, be a follower till then, but fit into your team. You know, go sit over, walk across the room and sit next to a guy, talk to him. Know all 20 guys. If there's guys on your team you're not going to like, you never like 20 guys. But I got along with all of them, and I'd make it work. I'd stay out and work on stuff with freshmen. And the last one was play tough. If you bring ferocity, if you bring an element of crudeness to the game, that always has value. You know, if you're willing to block a shot with your face, if you're willing to run a guy that's tougher than you are, if you're willing to fight for a teammate, that has value. So those were my 4 rules, and I followed them. Having outdoor ice was the big equalizer, right? Before global warming and climate change, we could skate as much or as little as we wanted, and that's where I made up the distance.
Do you ever look back at that and go, if a snowstorm hadn't happened, maybe you don't fall into hockey?
Yeah, I have thought of that. And then I think I would have done something else. Like I've never liked sports that weren't team sports. Like I never could have been a figure skater or a tennis player. Like to me, what I valued most about sports was having teammates around me that I could be friends with and hang around with and do stuff with. So I played rugby when I went to law school. I started playing rugby for the Harvard Business School rugby football team, and played for them for 4.5 years. I've always liked team sports and being around the guys and having a peer group. You know, when I was a freshman, I flew to Providence College in the fall of 1973, and I was homesick. But the night I landed, I had a family. I had 25 guys, right? We had a team meeting on Sunday night. Right away, I had 25 buddies. And there were a couple guys that I had played with in high school that had gone there. So I didn't have a normal college experience where you leave and go away from home and don't know a soul. I had a family as soon as I got there. And I love that about sports.
Yeah, it makes going away from home super easy. Well, not super easy, but adjustable, because I lived away from home a lot of years. And when you get to places and have people that are in the same predicament as yourself, there's a camaraderie in that. And you find you make good friends quick if you're just a little bit outgoing enough to sit around and talk with those folks.
Yeah, I agree.
In Providence, were you a walk-on?
Yes.
So did you fly out there not knowing you were going to be on the team?
Yes. I flew out with John McMorrow, who was a line mate of mine in high school, and I played with him at Providence, and he was a full ride. he was a high pick with the New York Rangers back when, now everyone's a high pick, but back then college kids weren't high picks and Americans weren't high picks. He was a third or fourth rounder with the New York Rangers back in 1973. And Mac should have been a great hockey player. He worked hard. He was built like my mom called him Popeye. Had the hardest shot of any guy really I've ever played with, but he got hurt every year. He had serious injuries every year. Knee, broken hand. He had a bad skate cut when we were seniors. Could never get on track. Scratch golfer too, but we're flying out. He's on a 4-year full ride. I'm a walk-on. And so you got to make the team. So I made the team. Again, follow the 4 rules. I was the hardest worker every practice. Did everything right, coach's dream. Fit in with my teammates and played tough. Remember our first scrimmage, we weren't allowed to fight. So Lou Lamoriello was our coach, no fighting in the drills. So we had drills for like a month. Back then, there was no limit on when you could start. So we would start out Monday after Labor Day. Weight room, 2-a-days, running on the baseball field. And then finally went on the ice. The new rink was being built. The Schneider Arena was new then. It was being built while we were going through the fall. So we skated at North Smithfield and what's one? Something Abbey, Portsmouth Abbey. We skated at these different rinks. We skated at the Civic Center. We skated at Brown. But then we were at the Providence Civic Center, I'll never forget. And Kevin Gaffney was a tough defenseman from Rhode Island. And in fact, his nephews both played, his brother played at Providence College, and his young nephews were stars at Providence College after me. And Kevin was getting on my nerves. I weighed 176 pounds when I was a freshman. Same height I am now, 6'2". I was just a bone rack. And Kevin was getting on my nerves. So I said, as soon as we scrimmage, we're going. So remember the first time I was on the ice with him, Lou dropped the puck and I just charged across the ice to the other side and fought him. And it was a statement, like I weighed 176 pounds. He was 195. I was a freshman. He was a junior. And it was just a statement to everyone that's sitting on the bench, I'm making this team. And the fight went fine, no clear winner or loser. But I remember guys looking at me different after that. So I did what I had to do to make the team. I didn't play very much my first year. I mostly killed penalties. Next year, so go back, and Lou put me on a half scholarship. And I went from killing penalties to playing a little bit third, fourth line. And then I kept working in the gym. So I came back my second year. Instead of 176, I was 185. Now, mind you, my height never changed in 4 years, 6'2". Gained 9 pounds that first summer. Gained the next year I came back at 185. The next year I came back at 195. Now I was a big hitter. Now those hits are starting to hurt. And you put on 10 extra pounds, and now you finish a defenseman, and he sometimes doesn't leave the ice. Sometimes he crumples up on the ice. And then senior year I came back at camp at 205 and played at 200. So when I went to camp with the Flyers, 4 years after I went to Providence College, I was exactly 30 pounds heavier than I was without any height gain. That's just all filling out.
You nonchalantly mention your coach is Lou Lamoriello. And for any hockey fan, I mean, he's royalty now in the NHL. I think, I'd read an article on you that said that was, at that age, it's a formative years of any person. But to have Lou, the guy overseeing you for 4 years, how impactful was that on your life?
Well, I owe Lou a lot. I love the man. Those were the 4 most important years of my life. And I've had, that annoys both of my ex-wives when I say so I used to say they're the best 4 years of my life. Now I just say they're the 4 most important. No, I was fortunate that Lou asked me to go there, recruited me, then put me on scholarship and kept me there. So I went half scholarship second year, full ride. And I was a very serious student too. I went to Harvard Law School after I got out. I was a Rhodes Scholarship finalist. But Lou was a tremendous influence on me, hockey-wise, and as a person. Like, Lou taught you how to act. Like, we had to go to class. It wasn't optional. We had to have good manners. Like, we were very popular on campus among the athletes because we all went to class and we all dressed properly and we all had good manners. We all had short hair back then. And so there were things that Lou did that were annoying, and he had too many rules. But I think what would surprise people is he was very progressive. As for an old school guy, because we were old school the way we played and practiced and everything, and he liked it tough. But old school guy with great progressive ideas. Like we stretched back then. As part of our workout, we stretched. And young guys would be looking at us going, yeah, that's real progressive. Nobody stretched back then. You went out on the ice and we stretched. And we stretched in between weight workouts for flexibility. We did some early plyometric work. We did circuit training. Back then, guys would go in and try and do as many on the bench as they could with 275. Well, he'd put 200 on the bar and say, do 30 or do 20. And so we did circuit training and stretching in between. And I remember telling guys that I'm in training camp with the Flyers 4 years later, and they're like, wow, we just started doing that now. We used video, which a lot of teams back then, you won't believe it. No one used video. When I first started playing hockey, it didn't exist.
What did a video session look like back then?
Well, it was Super 8 film. Like it was like home movies. There was no VHS or VCRs or any of like stuff that the kids would laugh at now. There wasn't even that. I mean, remember, I didn't get my first cell phone until 1983. I sent my first email when I worked for the NHL in 1994, 1995. So, I mean, again, this has all been rapid, but for guys your age, all the stuff you take for granted, the stuff that just came in. My first cell phone was the old Maxwell Smart, it was about this big. It was about 14 inches tall.
Need the briefcase to carry it around.
Yeah, it was. Honest to God. And it was, we used fax machines back then. I remember even when I was a lawyer. So when I worked at the law firm, the most memory that my secretary had, she had a IBM Selectric typewriter with 40 pages of memory. And I was routinely doing documents, bond documents and corporate documents, 200 and 300 pages long. She could only do 40 pages. So anything longer than that, you had to take it down to word processing and leave it. And if you're a young associate, you're a low priority, right? And then sometimes wait for it till 3 or 4 in the morning. If it had to go in the next day, you'd have to stay and sleep at your desk and wait till word processing could get to this document. Like, no, I mean, you laugh, but it was very primitive then. And now, like I still have a fax machine here in my house, and my kids tease me about it all the time.
Does it ever bother you then? I mean, those are the romanticized days of the hockey world. Now, I mean, a goal goes in, you got 18 different directions to look at anything. Do you ever think we've gone maybe a little too far?
No, I think the people that complain about or reminisce about the good old days forget that what we did have then was some privacy and some peace. Like if you can't track me down on my cell phone, the whole pace of life slows down. You know that until I check my messages. When I used to go to training camp with the guys that represented me, I would drive down the Jersey Turnpike. I'd stop at every other service plaza and phone and check my messages. Like there were no cell phones then. There's old answer machines, and you entered the code, and But what that did give you was peace. So when I was driving in the car, I had peace. I could dictate memos to my assistant. I could listen to music. Now you got XM radio, so you're listening to hockey all the time. You're interrupted by phone calls all the time. You're way more efficient, but there is truly no peace. There's no downtime from the job. So, but I would trade the efficiency for the old days. The old days weren't efficient. We were very poor use of time. The St. Louis Blues, when I first started working for teams in 1987, and other guys you talk to will remember this if they're my age or older. They used to close for the month of July. You used to get a fax from the St. Louis Blues on June 30th that the St. Louis Blues will be closing tomorrow for the month of July. Any emergencies, call Susie Matthew, and here's the number. They closed for the month of July. I'm not making this up. Lots of other teams closed for 2 weeks in July, and it was mandatory staff holiday at that time. So it's very different now. Like no one closes for 2 weeks. That ain't gonna happen ever again. And no one will ever close for a month again. But the St. Louis Blues used to close for the month of July. Now you think their lives weren't simpler back then?
No, 100% they were simpler. Can you imagine these days if the Toronto Mapleleafs just sent out a memo saying, we'll talk to you guys August 1st after the long weekend?
Exactly. And even if the team said, okay, we get it, the media would kill you. They'd be like, you can't shut down for a month. So no, it's, I I think it's much. There are things about the old days I like better. It was simpler with fewer teams. With 21 teams, it was much easier. You knew everybody. You knew all the players. There weren't as many teams to follow. Now you got 32 teams once Seattle comes in. They're all going to have their own American League team. So you got to know if you're a GM, you got to have a pretty good working knowledge of 64 teams, but you got to know the farm teams as well, or at least the key guys on those farm teams. So just to scout, if you say, okay, my goal this year is to see every NHL team and see every minor league team, that's 60 nights out of a year. That's pretty well all anyone scouts. Even the guys that scout a lot, like Bob Murray and Steve Yzerman, they're not going to see more than 64 games of teams involving other than their own team. So that would use up your whole scouting budget, including amateurs and stuff. So it ain't going to happen. So my last few years, I didn't see all of the farm teams. And in fact, my years in Calgary, I didn't see most of them. I didn't see even half of them. And back when I was an assistant GM, I saw every farm team at least twice. But again, there were only 21 teams, and that's pretty easy. You go down to Milwaukee and stay for the weekend, and they play 3 different teams, and now you knocked off, well, Rockford wasn't in the league back then. Now you knocked off Peoria, you knocked off whatever, and so it was much simpler and easier with 21 teams.
I assume when you take over the helm as GM of a hockey club, then especially now, one of the things you got to do is you got to get staff in there you can trust every single word they say, because it's impossible to see every player and have your finger on the pulse of every possible person that plays, and and the constant changing of every situation. So as a GM, I guess, what was your first, when you went into a new team looking at it, what was the thing you're like, I got to do this on every single team so I can set the path straight and point it in the right direction?
Well, first off, most teams have a lot of really dedicated, talented personnel working for them. We're fortunate in our league that we're surrounded by honest people that mean well and want to get it right. So I never cleaned house in all my years, 30 years working for teams. So 5 times I went in and took over a team, never cleaned house. Might make 1 or 2 changes, but basically said to the people there, just show me what you can do. We'll make a determination at the end of the year. Show me what you can do. And then I might make 1 or 2 changes. But so, for example, what just happened in Buffalo, the Red Wedding in Buffalo, I that's unfathomable to me that you're going to make that judgment and ruin 22 people's lives in one day. I never did it, never would. And I'd be embarrassed if I had. That's something that would embarrass me until I died. But going to give him, bring in Dave Nonis. Most places I worked with Dave Nonis, brought in with Toronto, brought in Dave Poulin and Claude Lysell. But I kept Jimmy Hughes around, kept Dallas Eakins around. Like, I think there's enough talented people there. You just got to reset them to the type of hockey you want to play. So in my case, usually I had to get a guy who said, look, I like it a little cruder than most people do. So you got to start looking for kind of players that play my kind of style.
Yeah, the Red Wedding, geez, that's the first time I've heard it called that, which is completely apt to what happened in Buffalo. I think that shocked every fan, every person, everywhere. I want to go back quickly to Lou Lamoriello. I'd listened to a story that he was the one that convinced you to take the LSAT. And if it wasn't because of him, you wanted to be a history teacher and a coach.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about becoming a coach after that? Because that's one job I'm pretty sure you never did.
I never did other than hockey schools. And I think I would have been a hell of a coach. That's what I really wanted to do when I was 22, when I graduated. So after my 3rd year, I was elected captain of the team along with Ronnie Wilson. And playing with Ronnie Wilson for 4 years was a great gift. What a great player he was. What a great guy. But I was planning, I didn't think the Flyers would sign me, but they had claimed my pro rights after my 3rd year. So back in the day, if you didn't draft a kid, you could claim him later. So there's none of these undrafted college free agents, there's none of these Tyler Bozaks. A team would just list you. So I remember I was going home after my 3rd year of school. I went back to Minnesota every summer. And Lou said, just so you know, the Flyers claimed your rights. I said, well, what does that mean? He goes, it means you have to sign with them if you sign with anybody. And I remember laughing as I was walking away, like, sign with the Flyers? Why would they sign me? So going to senior year, go through the year, and in the fall, I'm walking down to the rink, and Alana Mooney was Lou's secretary, really neat lady. And she comes out and says, Coach wants to see you. So I'm like, oh, Christ, that's never good, right? So I go in and I'm like, I had a girlfriend back in Minnesota all through school. I didn't go out much. I didn't screw around. The only time I broke curfew in 4 years was to study. Because I had a big exam, I'd get up after curfew and study with Mike Cuddy. Mike Cuddy was a history major like me. He was a star on the baseball team, pitcher. And we would stay up together after curfew and study. So pretty sure it wasn't about me. So I thought one of the freshmen must be in her jam. So I go in and Lou's got the LSAT and he shoves it across the application to take the LSAT, law school admission test. And he shoves it across the desk. He says, you're taking this exam. You're writing this exam was the exact words, I think. Your professor's telling me if you do well on it, you'll get into Harvard or Yale. So I look at it, law school admissions test. So I shoved it back. I said, Coach, I have no interest in going to law school. And he shoved it back. He said, you don't understand. That was not a request. You're writing the bleeping exam. And so I argued with him. I said, I don't want to go to law school. I don't like lawyers. I don't want to be a lawyer. And he said, you're writing the exam. He said, it could change your life. Just do it. And I knew how important it was to Lou because he let me be late for practice to write the LSAT. And you were never, ever late for practice at Providence College. Never. So I wrote the exam. The night before the exam, you can take a course to study to take the LSAT for 3 months, right? So the night before, Friday night, it comes with a booklet, like 22 pages long with sample questions. So I read the booklet, cover to cover, put it down, did something else, came back, read it cover to cover, drank a cold beer, went to bed. Took the exam the next day, 9 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. I don't know how I did. So I go down to practice. I throw on my stuff, get out there as fast as I can. I had the worst headache I've ever had in my life. And I skate out on the ice, and Lou said, how'd it go? I said, I have no idea. I might have done well. I might have bombed it. And I said, all I know is I have the worst headache I've ever had in my life. And Lou said, I don't care about your headache. Get in line for the next drill. So anyway, I get it back. I get a 704, like 98th percentile on the old score. And like, even now I'm showing my age. Now I think it's based on a score of 35. Back then it was based on 800. So I got a 704, which is in the 98th percentile. Now Harvard's a realistic possibility. Georgetown. I get into Harvard and Georgetown. And that's why I went. Everyone said, go. I didn't even know. I remember my first day of law school. A guy said to me, I want to be a litigator when I get out. What do you want to be? And I didn't even know what a litigator was. I didn't know. Like I had no idea. So I'm like, I just want to graduate. I remember telling him that. I just want to graduate. It's like, I had no idea. Like people plan their lives and think ahead and plan stuff. And when I speak at law schools and business schools, I tell the professors right away, I apologize, but I'm the worst guy to have here because I never planned a day of my life. I never knew what I was going to do. My theory was have as many good options as you can. If you got good options, you'll always make good choices. So the average 21-year-old turning 22, graduated from Providence College, trying to get a job, waiting to hear from grad school, whatever. I've got an offer from the Flyers, and I've got an acceptance to Harvard Law School. Two pretty good options.
Two great options.
Thanks to Lou.
It's unbelievable that you didn't want to go, and you think of where you're at now. And that's Lou could, kudos to Lou, because he could see maybe some writing on the wall, the tea leaves, what was showing there if you got into law school and where that would take you.
Yeah. It was all because Lou cared about a kid from Minnesota.
That's unbelievable. Well, Brian, it's been half an hour. I want to know, I don't want to keep you too long. I got you for 5 more minutes. If we can keep going, you just let me know.
We started a little late. Do 10 more minutes and then we'll go.
Okay. Well, if I got 10 more minutes with you, I want to get to a couple of stories or a couple of questions for you. I'd love to keep talking about your career because I find it extremely fascinating. I find the fact that you weren't a hockey guy and a snowstorm bottles you up and you start watching it from there, you can make Providence and all that. And Lou stopping you and making you write the LSAT when you argue with him is almost unbelievable, to be honest. But I told my father, he is not a Spittin' Chicklets listener, and I heard the story about Kevin Bieksa, and my father was not a Brian Burke fan until he heard an iteration of that story. So I told him I'd ask you to tell it on here about BX and Fedorov in the bar and the fight that ensued and what happened.
Well, tell your dad I said hi. Now, this will show you how obnoxious I am. Whenever I speak, do a lot of public speaking, or I did when I worked for teams. Someone always comes up to me afterwards and said, I've never liked you, but you seem like a good guy. And my ex-wife used to be like, you have a chance to make a friend there. Just make a friend, say thank you. You know what I say to him? I said, do you think I care what you think about me before you got here today or after? Could care less what you think of Brian Burke yesterday, today, or tomorrow. I could care less. And it used to drive my ex-wife, and she said, just hug the guy. Now you made a friend. And now you say that to him, and now your dad's going to be like, I was right, he is a jerk. So I do it half kidding.
On that, were you always like that? Or was that something you learned somewhere along the way to not worry about what other people said? Because, I mean, you went into some hot spots in Canada, and media is tough. Is that something you always had?
The number of people whose opinion I truly value, you can count on my two hands. I mean that.
Yeah.
And I felt that way all my life. I've never been upset about being alone on an issue. But Pat Quinn really reinforced that. Pat Quinn could have cared less what people thought of him. I remember my first year, Tony Gallagher wrote something that really bothered me, really got under my skin. And Pat called me in and he said, look, we're not having this talk again. He said, you gotta ignore this stuff. He said, I'm not gonna tell you to not let it get to you. You've got to ignore it. Don't read any of it. He said, why are you reading the paper anyway? So I was new in Canada, right? I was a new American trying to get my Canadian citizenship. I read both newspapers cover to cover. I knew which high schools girls teams were competitive. I knew who my MLA was. I knew about the traffic patterns. I knew the neighborhoods. Because it's your job to fit in when you go to a different country. It's your job to fit in. Canada didn't have to embrace Brian Burke. I had to embrace Canada. So I'm reading the paper cover to cover, including the sports. And Pat says, why are you reading the paper? I said, because I want to fit in. I want to know what's going on. He said, well, skip the sports page. So I did. I learned a great lesson. He said, I'm going to save you lots of heartburn and lots of aggravation. Don't pay any attention to it. So that really helped with Pat. But I felt that way. I really don't care. Anyway, tell your dad I said hi. So Kevin BX, I drafted him. He played at Bowling Green. He was a really good college player. But you're limited to 50 contracts. So every NHL team can only sign 50 contracts. So you're not just signing people randomly. You're not just giving every guy you draft a contract. So after his team was eliminated in the NCAA tournament, we brought Kevin to Manitoba, which is where our farm team was. So that night we played, he did not dress. And I don't think he dressed. I'm pretty sure he didn't. Anyway, if he did, all the players went to Earl's. Which used to be near the old arena. Great bar, by the way. And he got in a fight with Fedorov. What happened was he was sitting by the bar, and he took a little cocktail straw out of his drink and threw it over his shoulder, not thinking. And it landed on the table behind him, and Fedorov was sitting there with Kirill Koltsov, this little Russian defenseman we had. So, and Kevin's a tough kid, but Fedor was a big man. Fedor was like 6'4", 230, way bigger than his brother Sergei, and a good kid. Fedorov was a good kid. I thought he just screwed up too much on the ice and in practice. He just could never get it right, but nice kid. Anyway, he challenges Kevin to a fight. So Kevin says to Dallas Eakins, who's our captain, I'm here on an ATO, an amateur trial agreement. He said, I can't fight him. And Dallas said, go outside and fight him. Beat the crap out of him. So he did. And he comes back in. He one-punched Fedor, cut him wide open and knocked him out. Left him in the parking lot at Earl's. Comes back in, and he said, oh, Christ, they're going to send me home tomorrow. And Dallas said, you don't know our boss. He said, they're going to sign you tomorrow. So the next morning, Steve Tambolini called me and said, we had a problem last night in Manitoba. I'm like, I looked at the game sheet. They're 2 hours ahead of Vancouver. I get the game sheet faxed to my house. No game misconducts, a couple of fighting majors, but not. I said, well, what happened? Did a player get into trouble with a player? He said, no. I said, did a player go down the runway? So sometimes back then, they used to charge down the runway to the other dressing room and fight. He said, no. So I said, you get involved with one of the officials? Nope. You get involved with one of the fans? Nope. Better than that. And I'm like, well, I'm running out of suggestions, Tam. He said, two of our guys got in a fight at Earl's. I said, two of our own guys? Because sometimes the visiting team would go to Earl's if they were staying over. And there were fights in the parking lot between visiting, opposing team and home team, but never teammates. And so what happened? So he told me, and I said, all right, I said, sign the exit. So that's a true story. That's where I got got that.
That's awesome. Well, that turned. Dad heard that story and he's like, "Yeah, that Brian Burke, he's got to be a good guy because that's a great story. That is a great story."
That's a true story, every word of it. And it embarrasses Kevin sometimes, but it's true.
How about? I was thinking, you're working for Pat Quinn when August 9th, 1988 happens, the Gretzky trade. Were you guys at all in on Wayne Gretzky?
Yeah, you know what? Edmonton offered him to us. We couldn't afford it. It was like 15 million US in cash, or maybe even more than that. Maybe it was 25 million. I think LA ended up paying 15 million. I think to us it was, I want to say 25, and like Kirk McLean and Greg Adams, like it would a couple of 3 firsts. Like the price was way too high, and it was out there that he might end up in Vancouver. So I remember we were very nervous that. So I went home. Pat said, "Go home and see if we can justify this. We can recover the money." We only had like 11 luxury suites in the Old Pacific Coliseum. I think our top ticket price that year was $30. How are we going to recover $25 million or 15 or 20 or whatever it was? There's no way we could. So I came back and said, "Pat, we can't do it." And so Pat said, "We'll get it out there. We don't need our season ticket holders thinking that Gretzky's going to be here." So I leaked it to a reporter on Pat's instructions that he was going to LA. And that ended the discussion. But yeah, to this day, I've dreamed about that. What would that have been like to have Wayne Gretzky on your team?
Well, and just to see that, like, I assume when you're sitting in the office and that comes across, Wayne Gretzky's available, you must have had to sit down for a couple minutes. Like, can we
Yeah,
even?
we never thought, and we were in the same division. We never thought they were serious. We're not going to go back into Northlands Coliseum 6 times a year with Wayne Gretzky. But it was like trading goalies and goons back in the day. You never trade them in your division. You can trade a tough guy to the Rangers, but you're not going to trade a tough guy to the Oilers that might come into your building and beat the snot out of somebody. So goalies and goons was the rule back then. You don't trade them in your division. Same with Wayne. We didn't think they were serious, but I think LA paid 15 million and Jimmy Carson and all the other player assets. I think they asked for 25 from us. We couldn't do it. We just couldn't justify it. Like even with Wayne filling the building, even if we doubled our ticket prices, which we never could have done, we couldn't have got the money back. Even if we filled every seat at double price for 10 years, we couldn't have got the money back.
I thought I'd bring up too with it being Pride Month, you can play. I think that's something very close to your heart. And I think if people in my area haven't heard about it or don't know anything about it, maybe just as long as you want to go, Brian, maybe a little bit of something about you can play, just maybe what it's about and if people want to get involved, how they can.
Well, I went down Sunday, which would have been the Pride Parade, but they canceled it, obviously. I went down Sunday and walked the parade route in honor of my son, just like I've done it. I first went to Pride with him, and then I marched for him after he passed away. My son, Brendan, that was a student manager at Miami University in Ohio. Rico Blasi was a coach. Tommy Wingles was there. I mean, the list of players that were good to him was amazing. But he came out to the team as openly gay, and it was a big story. The general manager of the Toronto Mapleleafs has a gay son, which was a non-event to me. Like I could have cared less. But then he died in a car accident in 2010, and so Pride's very important to us. We started You Can Play, which is to encourage athletes to stay in team sports, even if they're gay, even if they see evidence of homophobia. We think it's saved a lot of young men's lives and women's, more so men than women. Gay women do not have the same problem of acceptance in sports that gay men do. But we think it's been a big cool. So if you want to look, You Can Play. We're online. This is the charity started in Brendan's memory. If you can play well enough to help our team, we got a uniform for you. You're welcome in our dressing room if you can help us win. So it's a message of hope. It's much broader than sports. That basically you're welcome here. It's been partnered with the NFL and the NHL and NBA. They've done great work. And like I say, Sunday I went down and marched the parade route. So in Toronto, the Pride Parade goes down Yonge, but the village, the gay village is Church Street. And we walked the same route, parallel route. Rick Mercer and I, the famous Canadian comic and author and actor, we walked, and my daughter and my ex, we walked the parade route one street over, right through the heart of the village in honor of Brendan. So we remembered him this year at Pride. But yeah, there's lots of ways you can support Pride too. There's PFLAG, which is Parents and Friends of Lesbian and Gays. They're great. You can be a gay straight ally. You can play. We'd love to have you.
Cool. Appreciate you sharing that. We'll go into the final segment here, just nice and quick. The Crude Master Final Five. 5 quick questions. As long or short as you want to go, Brian, and then I'll let you go. I know you're a busy guy. So a huge shout out to Heath and Tracy McDonald, huge supporters of the podcast since the very beginning. First one, if you could sit down with a beverage and pick the brain of anyone, who would you want to sit down with?
Well, I'll stick to hockey. I mean, I have much bigger interest in hockey. If it were, I'd like to meet Doris Goodwin Kern, the famous historian, or Doris Kern Goodwin. I get her name backwards. She's a Harvard professor of history, and I'd love to talk history with her. I've read all of her books, and I know people say, you love her books, can't remember her name, but that's who I would. Hockey-wise, probably Sam Pollock. I knew Sam Pollock. I was fortunate enough to meet him in his official capacity when he worked for Baseball Canada. He was a great baseball mind, too. People forget that. Same as Lou. Not many people know Lou Lamoriello was a great baseball mind, too. Managed in the Cape Cod League. I was on the board of the Yankees for years, still maybe for all I know. But I'd like to, probably Sam Pollock. I knew him, but never got to really pick his brain.
I have to ask, I was a history major as well in college, enjoy history. Is there a specific book that you've read that sticks out to you?
I like Shelby Foote, his 3-volume work on the Civil War. Shelby Foote passed away a few years ago, but he wrote a 3-volume, over 1,000 pages each. It's a history of the Civil War, and the detail is phenomenal. And I've read it 3 times.
3 times?
Yeah. And then I'm trying to think the 1-volume work that I recommend. It's a Mac something. It's a Irish or Scottish name. There's a 1-volume work in the Civil War that I think I tell people start with that and then go to Shelby Foote. But I'm drawing a blank. McKinley or McNally, but I'm drawing a blank on it right
now. You're known for your word choice. I was laughing. I'd listened to one of the Spittin' Chicklets episodes, and you got talking about different words you use to kind of mess with media. Is there a word that you never got to use that you still have sitting in the repertoire, sitting there waiting to be used?
I don't think I ever used pusillanimous, which is one of my favorite words. Pusillanimous kind of fell out of favor. It was a common usage word till the Civil War in the U.S. Then it kind of fell out of favor, and it means cowardly. And I remember when my daughter Gracie was in grade 4, the teacher said, "Look, none of you know a word that I can't spell." And Gracie said, "I do." And she said, "What word's that?" And she said, pusillanimous. And of course, the teacher hadn't heard of it. It hasn't been used in 100 and something years. But that's one of my favorite words. I might have used it once in Vancouver, but I've wanted to trot it out a number of times. And but I think I have not used it, and that people will look it up. It's a great word, pusillanimous.
I'm sitting here going, pusillanimous. Can you imagine seeing that written in the paper? Everybody would be like, what does that mean? They'd have to write, they'd have to have the definition underneath it probably.
Yeah, I might have trotted that out once. I don't remember, but I always wanted to.
If you were commissioner for a day, would there be any rule changes you'd make?
I would change 2 things, and I've told Gary both of these, and he's sick of hearing it because I have really harped on it. One, I would change the draft lottery, which I detest. What just happened this past week is a disgrace. And I would change the schedule and do team travel more sensibly. The way the teams travel now is unnecessarily burdensome and expensive and tiring. And I have no idea why we don't do it better, because you can do it better.
Is it true that when the Oilers offer sheeted Dustin Penner, at some point you challenged Kevin Lowe to a fight?
Yeah, so they signed Dustin Penner, and I went off on Kevin. And later in the summer, he'd had enough of Brian Burke. He was doing an interview, and he said, Ryan Burke, I'm sick of him. Tell him anywhere, anytime. And I'm like, so I called Glenn Sather the next day. I didn't hear any of this. It happened in Edmonton. Someone called me right. So I called Glenn Sather, and I was in Newport Beach at my house. And I went in the backyard because my cell phone reception was a little bit better. And I thought my wife was upstairs, but she was standing right there at the kitchen sink, and I was right below the kitchen sink. And I called Sather. I said, your buddy just challenged me to a fight. Anywhere, anytime. That's not how you challenge someone to a fight. Here's how you challenge someone to a fight. You tell that jerk I'll be in Lake Placid on August 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. This is true. USA Hockey used to have a tournament up there with the Swedes and Finns first week of August. I said, I'll be there the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. I'm staying at the Holiday Inn in Lake Placid. You tell them to get up there. I'll rent a barn. I'll kick the crap out of them, and then I'll drive them to the hospital. So I hung up, and next thing I know, my wife is 3 feet behind me, heard the whole thing. And she goes, have you lost your mind? And I'm like, he challenged me to a fight. I'm fighting him. Like that's still right now. If you challenge me to a fight, we're fighting. That's just one of my rules. So she said, you know, I don't know if Sather called Bettman or if my ex-wife called Bettman, but someone called Bettman. So he called me about 10 minutes later. And he said, if I got this right, you just challenged Kevin Lowe to a fight? And I'm like, yeah. And he said, if you guys fight, I will suspend you for longer than your contracts. You'll be out of work for a year or two. I'm like, Gary, he started it. He said, I don't care who started it. You're not fighting. So that was the end. And Kevin and I have mended that fence since then. It's not a problem. He's a great guy. But it was just, he challenged me to a fight. And I'm like, I can't have that. I can't allow that.
Well, heck, you just put him in the Hall of Fame. You're one of the guys who votes on who goes in the Hall of Fame, and Kevin Lowe just got in. I mean, that's, I mean, you talk about mending fences. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's probably, you've probably been asked about that 1,000 times in the last week about Kevin Lowe. So the one I want to ask is the final question. Is I'd read, you know, the Hartford Whalers and all their storied history, the one thing that fans remember is the Brass Bonanza song when they scored. Is it true you got rid of that?
Yeah. The players asked me to. Like, I got rid of Brass Bonanza, and it's a catchy tune. I know I get grief for this. First off, Hartford has a very large place in history in the league. Wherever you go, you see Hartford Whalers sweaters and hats. Like, it's amazing. People love that team. And it turned out to be a coach's incubator. Look at the guys that played there that are coaching. Dean Evison, Joel Quenneville, Kevin Deneen. Look at the guys that come out of there that turn into coaches. It's amazing. John Anderson, like, it turned into a coaching incubator, kind of like Miami University was in football. All those football coaches that started at Miami. So Pat Verbeek was our captain. He came to me and said, look, it sounds like a college fight song. The guys don't like it. Can you get rid of it? So I did. Like, players first, right? Doesn't matter with the fans. You take, your players come to you and ask for something, you do it. So I did it. Well, the backlash was severe. Like, people love that song. So as soon as they got rid of me the following summer, they brought the song back in initially as a goal song, and then as a end of the rink song, like a regular, you know, like a school song at a college football thing. But yeah, I did it at the players' request, but I got grief for it. And I still, every once in a while, someone will stop me and say something about it. I can't believe you got rid of Brass Bonanza. I'm like, yeah, whatever.
Do you remember what song you guys put in place of Brass Bonanza?
No, but I let the players pick that too. Like, this is all about, I'm trying to win hockey games. And if you go back, the owner there and I parted ways after a year. Good guy, probably shouldn't have been involved in ownership of a pro team, not suited for it, but a good enough guy. We parted ways after a year. I really think we had a chance. If they'd left us alone there, we could have put that team together in a short notice. Because I brought in Sean Burke, so we had the stud goalie. That's the toughest team I ever had. Like, everyone talks about how tough Anaheim was. the Hartford Whalers in 92, 93 would have kicked the snot out of my team in Anaheim. We had a tough team, and we had really good players. Jeff Sanderson had 48 goals. Like that, Pat Verbeek was a great captain. We would have been fine if we could have kept that progression alive, but it didn't work out. So, no, it was the song would have come back, but that to me, I really enjoyed working there, and that team would have been fine if they left me alone. But that's the story of my life. The longest I've lasted in one city is 6 years. That was in Vancouver. So you're not going to get a chance to win many places if you only last 6 years.
Fair. Well, I appreciate you coming on and making some time for me, staying on a little longer than we discussed. It's been a real treat to have you on, and I'd love to get you again at some point, Brian, but thanks again.
My pleasure. Thanks. Nice to see you.
Hey folks, thanks again for joining us today. If you just stumbled on the show and like what you hear, please click subscribe. Remember, every Monday and Wednesday, a new guest will be sitting down to share their story. The Sean Newman Podcast is available for free on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you find your podcast fix. Until next time.